Took me a few years to get going, but by about 2012 or 13, I can't remember, I started doing deals. So got involved in the apartment game. I've always been a housing architect. So, apartments, real natural pivot and entry point for me. And, even then, after all of my experience and all of my education and all of my exposure, that pivot was one of the hardest things I've had to do in my life.
Welcome to the Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth podcast. I am your host, Nathan Barkocy. In the True Wealth community and on this podcast, we are passionate about creating time freedom, impact, and purpose through real assets and real relationships, because true wealth isn't solely what you have, it's who you become. Welcome back to the True Wealth community, and today's guest is going to provide so much insight as to how to scale real estate in particular, how to scale business, and really talking about the current marketplace, which is something that my members of this community are desiring and needing to understand as they begin their real estate investment portfolios, as they're beginning to scale those portfolios, and then of course as our entrepreneurial, the proactive and aspiring entrepreneurs are coming in and starting their businesses. They really need to get a good concept of what the marketplace looks like right now. And I would know no one better to be able to present that to them besides our guest today, Mark Shuler. Mark, thank you for being with us today. And I appreciate you explaining to us really the encounter that you've had with business. We're focusing on encounter today. So the encounter you've had with business, with the trials, how you've encountered your trials, how you've encountered the different phases of your life, scaled through your business portfolio in your career, and then where that leads us to today. So, Mark, would you introduce yourself to this True Wealth community?
Thanks for that gracious introduction, Nate. My name is Mark Shuler, and I have been practicing architecture for north of 40 years now. Have done legitimately probably somewhere between 500 and 600 projects. I still actively practice. I'm one of the few guys that really loves to get up every day and do what he does for a living. So it's still just fun for me. And it's, probably I'll do it until I drop dead at my desk and, maybe take a vacation every now and again. But, I started my career out as all architects do. You go through university, and then you go through your professional education, and then you go through your internship. And you're just learning to think like an architect and solve problems, and then understand the procedures and processes that are involved in executing your design work. So there's obviously a lot of engineering, but there's also, a lot of life safety compliance, a lot of governmental compliance, a lot of interface with licensed trades, contractors, government agencies. So, you just have to get exposure and legitimately reps with all of those projects that you do, to the point where you can hang your own shingle out and make your own mistakes, basically. So I did that pretty early in my career. I'm pretty naturally wired to be an architect. And I'm also, it turns out, to be pretty naturally wired to be an entrepreneur. I certainly didn't understand that at the time, but when I was in school, I saw all these people like gunning to get, become part of the drafting pool at a large firm. And that was, like, to me, never something I ever wanted to do. I thought long and hard about this throughout my career, about, what my goals were and what my career path was, and what the trade-offs were between, working in a large organization like that, where you're working on legitimately very complicated problems and they're really sexy projects. And but I didn't feel like I had any agency with those projects. I'm just, really good at what I do, and people capitalize on my skill set so they can make money. But, when the project's over, what's next? And I just never felt like that was a secure career path for me, that I was always reliant on somebody else to do their job, which I never trusted them to do. So pretty early, I hung my own shingle out and, just got into the residential game. I've done tons of houses, tons of multifamily and lots of urban infill. I live in a densely urban area. And so got really good with, zoning codes, all the other codes that are part and parcel of a dense urban environment. And, and to this day, I'm picking up jobs left and right for the fact that I know how to like navigate these systems and I can, I'm very quick and efficient at my job now. However, along the way, even that wasn't enough for me. I could have been a practicing architect for the rest of my life, but I quickly surmised that, I'm just a highly paid technician. And even though I had my own firm, basically all I did was buy myself a job. But I wasn't building any wealth, which is what I think the thesis of your community is. It's like, okay, great. I'm basically can keep earning income and a pretty decent income. But if I don't work, I don't earn. And that always bugged me. And so, about 10 years ago, I started getting into real estate. 10, 12 years ago, actually longer ago than that. I had worked with developers and investor types all throughout my career. From my earliest practicing days, I graduated in 1985 from professional school, and then I did the usual thing. I bummed around the world for a few years and hitchhiked my way through Asia and India with a backpack. Finally got back and decided to get serious about my career. So I moved to Seattle in late 1989, and I landed in a firm that was doing super high-end spec houses. Custom specs is what I call them. And this was back in my hand drafting days. So we were a firm of like, 10, 12 people. And it was the phrase we use in the industry is butt up, head down. So you're at a drafting board and we're just banging these things out. I mean, we were designing them rapidly. We were producing them rapidly. We were getting them out the door. And we had set up a huge production assembly line. And that taught me a lot. That taught me about systems thinking and analytics and balancing, the creative impulse with the drive of a developer who needs to get this product built because he's servicing debt. That was really my first exposure to it. And I took those lessons as I went along. And in your internship period of your career, you're legitimately bouncing from, office to office and just getting new experiences. And so my next office was a firm that was literally right down the hall. And this guy was a true developer. He was working with large institutional capital and we were developing, large apartment blocks here in Seattle. So these were 200 unit apartment buildings with two levels of underground parking for 300 cars. 3-4 times a week, I drive by a project I did back in 1990 as I take my wife to work. And it's a huge, huge project. It takes up an entire city block. And, it's not going to win any design awards, but it was a very competent execution on a very difficult site. And that parking garage, I laid that whole thing out. And it's very, very, very complicated piece of engineering. Probably one of the most proudest things I've done in my career is just figuring all that out.
Yeah.
But again, that gave me a lot of exposure.
Yeah. So how would you, so you were encountered so many different, I guess, paths forward with this, but it was always the focus on architecture. How did you then shift, and you might have been getting into this, but how did you shift from doing the architecture, right, just as the like employee base almost, into moving into your own portfolio? Because I know that's how we met, right? We met through Marcin Drode's boardroom. And so raising capital for projects, now you're doing this. Do you move developments? How did you get into this? What was the transition for you into this new entrepreneurial life phase?
Yeah, I was getting to that.
Yeah.
So, it was that exposure to those developers. Also, something you don't know about me, everybody in my family is in real estate. So I have 5 family members who are commercial brokers. And then my kid brother, who just retired, is the legitimately the foremost authority on real estate taxation in the country.
Mm.
He ran one of the largest accounting firms in the country. And he was a managing principal and their in-house real estate guy. So I've always had a lot of exposure, both professionally and just through my family, to real estate. It wasn't something I had to like stumble into. It was just professionally and, just the family business. It was something I was exposed to from an early age. It took me a while to get there. I'm wired a little bit differently than a broker. I'm not a broker personality at all. I'm
Mhm.
not a sales guy. I'm very analytical, and I think in terms of processes. And I'm not saying there's no process to sales and brokers, but it's not a natural thing that I do. But I could analyze the financial side, the deal making side, the development side. So I knew that about myself. And in the early aughts, I decided at 48 to go back to graduate school. You
Mm.
can believe it. And I went to the University of Washington's business school, and I got an advanced certification in commercial real estate development. A 9-month one of these executive programs, and I did that, and then took me a few years to get going. But by about 2012 or 13, I can't remember, I started doing deals. So got involved in the apartment game. I've always been a housing architect. So, apartments, real natural pivot and entry point for me. And, even then, after all of my experience and all of my education and all of my exposure, um, that pivot was one of the hardest things I've had to do in my life. Um, this is a business you probably know. I mean, you're drinking from a fire hose every single
Mhm.
day.
Right.
And so there was just like, oh, I thought I knew this game. I don't know anything about it. I just had to relearn a whole new career path for myself. And so I had to learn about financing. I had to learn how to talk to brokers. I had to learn how to analyze deals. I had to like hit the pavement and go look at dozens and dozens of projects. I think by the time I decided to like screw up the courage and get involved in the industry, it took me legitimately 2 years before I felt like I had enough under my belt that I could take down my first deal. And so for me, it's always been about a continuous evolution of my skill sets. That's the way I look at it. It's not about intellect or, I don't know what other roadblocks people put in front of themselves. To me, I just look at it as the acquisition of skill sets. I just have to get more skills until I master them, and then I can confidently move forward and
Mhm.
kind of pursue this business model. So, you know, umpteen years later, I'm still doing it. Sitting on a 4,200 door portfolio valued at about $600 million.
How did you execute that increase in the skills, right? Because like you said, you have to really increase those skills. You have to really feed into yourself. What was the strategy for you to execute that increase?
Well, you're assuming there was a strategy,
Yeah.
but Nate, I think so. Look, I'm a natural born problem solver. It's just what I do, and so I analyze problems, and then I map out in my head, how do I attack this problem as efficiently as I can? I'm really cognizant that you can go down rabbit holes in this industry.
Mhm.
I've seen too many people do that, waste a bunch of time, or worse yet, lose a bunch of money.
Mhm.
And so I am extremely cognizant of the risk involved in this line of work. And so I'm also hyper focused on downside protection, making sure I don't waste time and don't lose money. So I, analytically figured out what it was I needed to do at any given moment. And, spent a lot of time researching. I can tell you that AI makes this a lot easier now.
Mhm.
I used to spend, I can't tell you how much time online trying to track down this information. And now, Claude is fantastic. I mean, you just kind of input, your search parameters and boom, it's right there. I'm so much more efficient with that now than I have ever been. I write pitch decks that used to take me 2 weeks to kind of map out what I was going to say and all the graphics and putting it together in PowerPoint. And I mean, I've got really good at doing a pitch deck. I was on a call with a buddy of mine this morning. We were talking, and while we were talking, I put a pitch deck
Right.
and I sent it to him. I said, "Here, go do this." And I was advising him because he was creating his own pitch deck. And so he reached out to me yesterday, and I said, "You're going about." He sent me what he had done, and he'd done it in PowerPoint. I said, "What are you doing? Just load this and every other piece of information you have into Claude." And I got a text from him. Let me read it to you because this is really insightful.
Yeah.
He texted me at 9:40 this morning. He said, "Claude is blowing my mind with how much better it is than chat."
Right.
So he started out with Chat GPT, and then I said, "No, no, no, you got to use Claude." And so Chat GPT is where you do your analysis, but Claude is you load that analysis up into Claude, and Claude just spits it right out.
Yeah. And this is,
That
yeah,
shaved 2 weeks of effort off of what I used to do.
which really focuses on the time, right? And that really helps with execution to, get this stuff done. What is your
Times
what is your advice right now to an entrepreneur who isn't fully competent of how to use AI? Maybe they're not sure how to leverage it. You have to know the
Yeah.
right prompts, you have to know how to structure all
Yeah.
this. So how would you advise someone there?
First of all, don't be afraid of it. You can't make a mistake and you can't break it. And it's you in front of your computer. So there's no one looking over your shoulder to say, "Oh, you're an idiot or you're a fool." No, you just, and look, there is a game or a rhythm you get into with AI. You have to, starting out, you're going to get a lot of false positives. All right. You're going to get a lot of answers like, "That's not what I asked for." So you learn how to prompt AI correctly. Now the models are getting much better and they're getting much more intuitive. So that's helpful. But when I first started using AI, I mean, it was like a 2-year-old I was trying to control. That's one thing. Just practice reps, just get used to it, get comfortable with the technology. It'll take you 3-4 weeks before you get proficient with it, but it is high ROI on the investment of your time. I will tell you, probably the single highest ROI you can make at this point is learning how to use AI in your business. And if you go on LinkedIn, there's all sorts of people bloviating about, I've got the inside scoop on AI. Sometime I download some of their stuff and, I've got, but I find that the best teacher with this is experience, one. And then, as you get proficient with it, yeah, you can use some of those more advanced bots but those are usually very tightly focused on specific tasks. And a lot of those times those tasks are outside of my wheelhouse or what I'm trying to currently work on. So, and then, and then the parameter, so you can actually get inside someone's pre-built bot, but the guardrails are so tight. I find that sometimes I can't expand beyond the guardrails to encompass other information I'm thinking about. So I stay kind of in the generalist mode, and I get damn good output from that at times. Um, but to answer your question directly, just don't be afraid of it. Just take it on, and I'm pretty. I'll take risk with anything. This by far has been the single greatest increase in my productivity in my entire career.
Mhm. Well, and
Really,
that's and
it's
that's
a transformational technology, no question about it.
right. And so now is the time to do it because I've spoken with many other entrepreneurs as well who say that it's never been easier to become an entrepreneur and build out your own platforms, build out your own systems. But that's, of course, if you know what you're doing, if you have the passion behind it, and then if you direct it in the right direction. Because if you aren't using AI properly, you can get so turned around, you can get so
You
lost.
can.
So there's the key, right? Is practice makes perfect, So the more reps that you get, the better your outcomes will be.
Yeah, look, AI is a tool,
Yeah.
but it does not replace drive, ambition, and focus. You have to have an idea of what it is you're trying to do and where you want to go before you can, utilize a tool, right?
Hmm.
So, that said, it can be a tool of discovery to help you kind of vet out, business ideas, for instance. I never thought about doing that because I already know what I want to do. And, but I mean, if you're thinking about building a platform or doing something more entrepreneurial, or if you're laid off and looking for a gig, AI is perfect for that. I
Hmm.
mean, just, and I mean, I'm advising a friend of mine who's going through a big career change here. and she moved from Vancouver, Canada to the Puget Sound where I live. Extremely talented interior designer, but she's been a worker bee her whole life and an artist. And she doesn't know anything about she doesn't have the best handle on growing a business, marketing and all that stuff. So I've been coaching her and mentoring her in how to go about doing that. And we're using AI. It's like, look, just input this, upload your portfolio, and then, target 50 builders in the Puget Sound, have the AI set appointments, and go get some FaceTime with all these guys. And in 2 weeks, she's gotten 5 interviews.
Mhm.
And, I mean, she could have spun her wheels for months before figuring any of this out. So it's really good for a lot of things. So,
Yeah, entirely. So taking us back, I'm glad we could dive into AI. That's very applicable right now. But taking us back to the starter days of your entrepreneurial journey, I really like how you've talked to me, especially, and you've touched on this in the podcast, but about risk, and about
oh,
risk
yeah, of
mitigation. So if you're willing to share with us, Mark, I would love to
course.
hear the biggest trials you faced, right? Some of the hardest things that you encountered that you were able to overcome through encountering those difficulties. You're able to overcome that, and that's what brings you today to being such a
Yeah.
successful entrepreneur.
Well, first of all, that's always ongoing. If you go on YouTube and in their search bar, type in the word grit, and there's been a lot of ink spilled in video recordings around this. This is really famous TED talk that I watch every now and again. But, most people, this whole economy and this whole society is so growth oriented, right? And a lot of it's economic growth. And, so everybody's got sort of their hustle on, and they're trying to get ahead, and education is a big component of that. So there's big industry out there in higher education, which seems to get more and more and more expensive all the time. Yeah. So, but with all that, everybody thinks you had to have all these degrees and then life's going to be great and you're going to get the dream job and, you're going to retire in the sunset, living on the beach in Hawaii, drinking Mai Tais. It's just not how it happens, I have found that, education is extremely important and credentials are extremely important. The true determinant between success and failure, in my mind, is grit and whether you are going to really do what it takes to succeed. And I am from a blue collar background in Detroit. Family worked the line, post-war America, where, a single income could buy you a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house with a detached garage and, a little plot of dirt in the backyard where you can plant a garden. And then, we'd bike off to the local park or swimming pool and, the great middle class lifestyle. I mean, we were lower middle class, but it was fantastic. Really hard to do that now, obviously. Very different era. For a whole lot of reasons. The economy is very, very different. We're not manufacturing based. It's a knowledge based and technology based economy. And if you don't have those skills, you're kind of being left behind. That's a lot of what the polarization in our society is about right now. But I've always been a believer in intestinal fortitude, and look where I came from and where I ended. I had no silver spoons in life. And it was just sheer, unadulterated, raw determination that got me to where I'm at. And believe me, I've taken a lot of punches along the way, and you just get right back up, you dust off your knees and you get back to work and you stop whining. It just, you get to work. And look, success is a funny animal. A lot of it, there's always a certain amount of luck involved with success. There's no question about that. Right place, right time, meet the right person, right opportunity comes along, you name it. My core philosophy around luck is the harder I work, the luckier I get. I just don't think you can be an entrepreneur without that fire, that just fierce determination to succeed. And have I succeeded always? Hell no. I've had some spectacular flameouts. But I just kind of got back up and got back to work. And Life goes on, and you learn as much, if not more, from your failures as you do your successes. They the most important thing they teach you is humility, and it teaches you just don't take anything for granted, because you can have it all one day and lose it all the next. And in this era that we find ourselves in the market, I think a lot of people are learning that lesson right now.
So yeah, for the current marketplace, how are entrepreneurs supposed to shift through that difficulty, right? If we're encountering so much trial and grit, and we have to keep pushing through, what is your insight for the current marketplace for an entrepreneur that's wanting to go forward? I've heard it several times, if you wanted to be an entrepreneur back in the 80s, you started a small business and that would serve people. But now it's the marketplace is very tricky. You have to figure it out. Obviously, you have to have the right people around you in your circle, and you have to be able to leverage the systems in place. We can absolutely leverage AI. But what would your advice be for an entrepreneur who's just starting off today, who's feeling the weight and the pressure of, the current marketplace and almost like it's impossible?
Combination of things. First of all, read the tea leaves and understand what this economy is about, what the macro forces that are at play are, and then look for niches within that context that looks like it could be a developable business model. So are you going to go into farming at this stage? No. I wouldn't encourage you to do that. We're not in agrarian society anymore. The cost of inputs are too high. The cost of labor is too high. You can buy organic heirloom tomatoes from Mexico right now, so I wouldn't encourage you to go out and try to do that in your backyard. Your cost of inputs are going to be too high, and you can't compete. So, and there's a lot of ink that's spilled on that, and both, a lot of, and I'm not going to get into that. But what I'm suggesting is right now, technology and the internet and inputs that you can control more readily, that are not subject to the vagaries of our political environment and hot wars in the Middle East and bad actors out there trying to disrupt the world economy. So that said, a lot of bad actors have bad intentions to take down the internet, and they can blow that up too. So, but I do, I think that tends to get overblown. I'm not sitting in these high-level security meetings that go on in Washington. So I can't tell you how often those types of disruptive activities are occurring. I'm sure it's occurring on like almost a daily basis. And hopefully we'll get through this political nightmare that we're in, and we'll put the more robust infrastructure in place to combat all this. So, and I do think we are going to get past it. That's the nature of our system. And, it tends to swing left, swing right. It's messy, it's noisy. But I don't, I don't, I'm not a political scientist and I'm not an analyst in that arena. So I don't feel like I can comment on that intelligently, but I can say I wouldn't be running out necessarily starting a bricks and mortar business right now either. I just think that, too many retail businesses in particular are going under. Restaurants are going under left and right. It's just the cost of labor, cost of inputs are too high. So you want to start, something, you want to be kind of looking at business models that don't subject you to that. And look, going right back to AI. I mean, you can type all this into AI and start analyzing, what's a good business that, has more of the inputs and I have greater control over, and, start marrying that with, your passions. And one thing I'll say about, anything in an entrepreneurial world, if you don't have a passion for it, it's not sustainable. I don't care how successful you are, you're going to burn out. I have worked 40 to 60-hour weeks for 40 years. I still get up, fired up every day to go to work. I still enjoy it, and so you have to really like what you do for a living, because you're going to be doing it for the, next 20 years. So, you've got to find some kind of drive that motivates you to get up every day and do it. And I think that's more important than just about anything else.
Right. Well, and that is true wealth, right? Having that passion for what you do, that is true wealth. Getting up every day and wanting to do what you do. And there's a large portion of entrepreneurial mindset in that, because it's hard to trade your time for money. working for another man if that's not what you're passionate. I mean, because it's hard to create passion about that, right? And
I
so
don't know anybody who loves working in corporate America.
right. And so being able to take your passions is the first step, right? You have to understand your passions, but then understanding how to move forward. This is all based on mentorship, right? Getting yourself in the right rooms, and that way you have the guidance to do that. Because I will tell you first and foremost, I have made many mistakes in my young entrepreneurial life, and and you have to know how to pivot from those because I mean they're going to come, right? The trials are going to come, and that's the whole concept of true wealth is that those trials will come, but that shouldn't be what stops you, right? The only difference between a entrepreneur that's successful and an entrepreneur that's a dreamer is the person who actually takes action even when they have failed, right? Even when they have fallen through. So that would be, I mean, I mean, an incredible message for this audience to hear because we can see that in your life, right? You've lived that yourself. So, how would you define true wealth in this modern marketplace? You and I have talked a lot about where we are in the market. So, explaining to the audience right now about the current marketplace, the current speed bumps that we're hitting. What is true wealth to you? And then how can this audience execute true wealth in their entrepreneurial journeys?
Yeah, that's a really profound question. First of all, wealth isn't just about accumulating things. Okay, that's the way I think about it. I could easily retire and right off the sunset and legitimately lie on the beach and get fat, lazy, and stupid all day. And I just choose not to do that. The myth of retirement in this country is, like my dad was a snowbird. Okay, he worked his whole life in Detroit, miserable winter weather there, and hot and humid in the summer, and he just couldn't wait to like retire and go to Florida and play golf till his 70s. And that's what he did. And for him, he was a really humble guy. No one accused him of being a rocket scientist. Highly decorated Air Force veteran he had, a couple of silver stars and a distinguished flying cross pinned to his chest. Came back, put all that in a trunk and forgot about it and got on with his life. And so he lived he taught me the value of work. Okay. But not more importantly, it wasn't the value of work. It was finding joy in the value of. He had a modest little split level house out in the suburbs of Detroit. It was 17 miles outside of Detroit in a rural area. It was all farms and apple trees when I grew up. Now it's all developed and you got Bilderberger houses with backyard pools, but that's a different story. But he just didn't like take himself all that seriously. I gave the memorial speech at his wake, and that's the thing I commented on. He's like a cross between George Patton, Jackie Gleason, and Fred Flintstone. My dad was an extroverted salesman who just never took himself that seriously. Okay. I think the best piece of advice I can give is don't be so fixated on these material goals. More of this, more of that, that for me anyways, is just a dead end and it's not sustainable. I mean, how much more crap do you need in your life? I'm trying to downsize. I can't stand stuff. And so there's that. But at the same time, if you want to leave a legacy for your family, you're going to have to do some work, right? And that for me is what I'm trying to do. But it has a different goal and it has a different meaning. And it provides me with joy that if I was just doing it for myself, I could give a shit. But I've got 6 grandkids I'm thinking about constantly that I'm trying to provide for. That brings me joy knowing that, I'm going to leave something behind and can't take it with you, so enjoy the ride as much as like pursuing the ride. You gotta step in. Like I am not perfect at this. Believe me, I am a workaholic and my long suffering partner gives me grief on this, every now and again. We have an uneasy alliance on this, but, I've come to appreciate, standing back and enjoying a sunset every now and again, you know? Um, I try to not work late into the night anymore. And look, that's just basic work-life balance. That's what it is. But don't I think it's important if you're starting out in this endeavor, you're going to do a lot of work on the front end. You can put in long hours, but I just think it's also really important to frame your why as to why you're putting in this time. It's not sustainable without that. Hope that
Absolutely.
answers your question.
Yeah, no, entirely. That's perfect. Yeah. And so true wealth goes beyond just the dollars, right? It's involved because you do need to take care of those 6 grandkids, right? But the time that you give to those 6 grandkids, right? The input that you give them, that is the true wealth that we're focusing on. And you can,
It is, but then there is the material component to it,
yeah.
and I think this is what you speak about a lot.
Mhm.
Like I said, I can practice architecture until the day I go out with my boots up. But I'm never going to build true financial wealth.
Right, right.
So I decided to do something that was aligned with my skill sets, and I'm just expanding who I am and what I do to give me that, you know, greater legacy wealth that I was talking about. I also started another business that, we're in the middle of rolling out right now. And my theory about money is, you've got your short, medium, and long-term money. My short-term money is my architecture practice. That's what I do to pay, that's what I do day to day to pay the bills. Keeps the roof over my head, pays all the bills, gives me a little walking around money. My long-term wealth are my real estate investments. You know, Problem with real estate is you tie your capital up, but there's extreme upside to it. And so, but when you deploy, you generally can't get your money on your hands on your money for years. And so you're spending a lot of time on operations like I do to manage those investments to get that payoff. But, my distributions and coupons that I get are relative to the amount of effort I put in, the risk I took. The distributions themselves are not that fantastic. That's known as cash on cash. And you're looking at 5 to 7% generally for a real estate deal, cash on cash. So I had to figure out that medium money. And so I decided to start this other business. And once we got it up and rolling, it's going to pay me, that cash flow, that medium cash flow that will then allow me to taper off practicing as much as I do to enjoy life more. So again, I have a strategy for all of this. But it's not like I woke up one day and had all this figured out.
Right.
You evolve. You really evolve as you gain confidence and skills and business savvy. You start thinking about these things. The other thing I'll say, and you mentioned it, get yourself a good mentor.
Mm-hmm.
Really, get yourself a good mentor. You don't have to pay for it. You can go out to these meetups and meet people there. Just network. There's tons of networking opportunities. You can meet people anywhere. And that's just you screwing up the courage to go out and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And those opportunities exist everywhere and they're free.
Right.
Why wouldn't you do it?
Yeah, and it's all about getting into the right room because that room will launch you forward. And that's the same thing that I've learned by working with you, and seeing the way you've grown and seeing the way the rest of our boardroom has grown. I mean, it's all about the people that you bring onto your team and then the people that you surround yourself to allow that team to scale even more effectively.
It's a basic Rockefeller principle. You just want to surround yourself with people who are more experienced and smarter than you. And you can't help but elevate your game to kind of keep up with these folks.
Yeah.
I love you.
That's perfect. Well, Mark, thank you for being with us today. And how can my audience learn more about you and find more about you and reach out to you for that mentorship as well?
Yeah, sure. You can reach me. I've got a couple of professional addresses. It's Mark at Shuler Architecture, SHULER architecture.com, or Mark at SGREinvestments, plural.com. And, I'm in front of the box all day long. I generally respond right away. Always love to talk shop. So feel free to reach out.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, I appreciate your time today, Mark. And to all those that are listening into the Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth podcast and the True Wealth community, thank you for joining us. And I know that this insight today will help you launch your entrepreneurial journey. Learn more about the True Wealth community at nathanbarkocy.com. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for listening to the Old Wealth, New Wealth, True Wealth podcast. This is Nathan Barkocy, and please remember that tomorrow is never promised. So I encourage you to make the most of today.